heavy mist clinging to the rolling hills of Columbia County is not just morning fog. It is a toxic brew of sulfur and carbon monoxide rising from the cracked earth beneath your feet. In the heart of the anthracite coal region lies a place that maps have tried to forget, and the government has erased. This is Centralia, Pennsylvania, where the ground is hot to the touch, and the silence is broken only by the hiss of escaping steam. It is a landscape that feels less like the United States and more like the waiting room of the underworld. A fire has been burning here for over 60 years, consuming the very foundations of a community that once thrived. The story of this town is not merely a tragedy of industrial error, but a haunting chronicle of a slow and relentless descent into hell. Imagine a bustling town in the mid-20th century, filled with the sounds of children playing and neighbors talking over white picket fences. Centralia was home to over 1,000 residents who made their living in the deep black veins of coal that ran beneath their cellars. It was a tight-knit community where families stayed for generations, and the church bells rang out across the valley every Sunday morning. The people here were tough and resilient, hardened by the dangerous work of the mines, but softened by their shared faith and heritage. They had no idea that the immense wealth buried below them would eventually transform into a voracious monster. The very coal that put food on their tables was waiting for a spark to turn their beloved home into a ghost town. The beginning of the end arrived on a seemingly innocent day in May of the year 1962. The town council had decided to clean up the local landfill located in an abandoned strip mine pit just in time for Memorial Day. The plan was simple and routine for the era, as 5 volunteer firefighters were hired to burn the trash. They set the pile ablaze and let it burn for some time before dousing the flames with water hoses. They believed the fire was extinguished and the job was done. But deep within the pit, the embers had found an entrance into the labyrinth of old coal mine tunnels that honeycombed the earth beneath the town. The fire had not died. It had merely gone into hiding to feed and grow in the darkness. For weeks, nobody realized what was happening beneath the surface. As the fire crept through the abandoned shafts, the labyrinth of tunnels provided an endless supply of oxygen and anthracite coal, creating the perfect conditions for an unquenchable inferno. The first signs were subtle wisps of foul-smelling smoke curling up from the ground near the landfill. Residents complained of bad odors, but the town officials assured them it was just residual trash burning. However, the ground began to feel unnaturally warm in certain spots, and vegetation started to wither and die for no apparent reason. The beast was waking up and stretching its fiery limbs directly under the foundations of the homes and businesses of Centralia. As the months turned into years, the fire grew bolder. and the evidence became impossible to ignore. Smoke began to billow from the ground in thick white columns that smelled of rotten eggs and brimstone. The federal government and state officials drilled boreholes to gauge the extent of the blaze and found temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. They tried to flush the mines with wet sand and fly ash, but the fire was too fast and too deep. It moved with a malicious intelligence, dodging their efforts and spreading further into the seams. The people of Centralia were living on top of a furnace, and the walls of their basements began to radiate a heat that no winter chill could penetrate. The true horror of the situation revealed itself in the form of silent and invisible killers. Carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide began to seep into basements and living rooms, forcing residents to keep their windows open even in the freezing depths of winter. Monitors were installed in homes to detect the deadly gases, and the constant beeping of alarms became the soundtrack of the town. Families woke up with headaches and nausea, symptoms of mild poisoning that whispered of the danger lurking in their own homes. The sanctuary of the family house had been breached by the toxic breath of the underground dragon. Fear began to take root in the community, replacing the camaraderie with suspicion and dread. Legends and folklore often intertwine with tragedy, and Centralia has its own dark prophecy. Years before the fire, in the late 19th century, a priest named Father Daniel Ignatius McDermott was said to have cursed the town after being assaulted by members of the Molly Maguires, a secret society of coal miners. He supposedly shook the dust from his shoes and declared a grim future. He warned that a day would come when St. Ignatius Church would be the only thing left standing in Centralia. For decades, this was dismissed as an angry rant. But as the smoke thickened and the people began to flee, the old priest's words echoed with a chilling new significance. The curse seemed to be manifesting in slow motion. The terror escalated in 1979 when the owner of a gas station inserted a stick into his underground fuel tanks to check the level. When he pulled it out, the stick was hot to the touch. He lowered a thermometer into the tank and was horrified to find the gasoline was 172 degrees Fahrenheit. The fire was heating the fuel from below, turning the gas station into a massive potential bomb. The fuel was pumped out immediately, and the station was closed, but the message was clear. The fire was no longer just burning unused coal. It was threatening to ignite the volatile infrastructure of the town itself. The ground was becoming a weapon against those who walked upon it. The turning point that captured the attention of the entire United States occurred on Valentine's Day in 1981. A 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski noticed a wisp of smoke coming from a grassy area near his grandmother's house. He walked over to investigate, and suddenly the earth opened up beneath him. a sinkhole 4 feet wide and 150 feet deep, appeared instantly, swallowing the boy. He screamed as he fell, clinging desperately to exposed tree roots, while the hot mud and toxic fumes swirled around his legs. The heat was intense, and the carbon monoxide levels in the hole were lethal enough to kill a grown man in minutes. By a stroke of miraculous luck, Todd's cousin Eric Wolfgang was nearby and heard the screams. He ran to the edge of the gaping maw and risked his own life to reach down. With adrenaline-fueled strength, Eric grabbed Todd's hand and pulled him from the suffocating heat just as the ground continued to crumble. Todd was saved, but the incident shattered the denial that had held the town together. A child had almost been eaten alive by the earth in his own backyard. The image of the smoking hole and the terrified boy made headlines across the country. Centralia was no longer just a town with a problem. It was a declared disaster area where no one was safe. The United States Congress eventually allocated $42 million for a massive relocation effort. The decision tore the community apart, creating a bitter divide between those who wanted to leave and those who refused to abandon their homes. Neighbors stopped speaking to one another, and the town meetings devolved into shouting matches. The government declared eminent domain, condemning the properties and forcing the residents out. One by one, the houses were bought and immediately bulldozed, leaving behind empty lots and ghostly staircases that led to nowhere. The vibrant grid of streets was slowly erased, leaving only the sidewalks and the street signs to mark where families once lived. A neighboring community named Byonsville, situated just down the hill, suffered a similar fate. The fire spread southward, consuming the coal seams beneath it and forcing the evacuation of its residents as well. Today, Byonsville is entirely gone, erased from the map, as if it never existed. The only evidence of the town is a small shrine and the overgrown foundations of what used to be homes. The fire was a conqueror, taking territory without mercy and leaving a scorched wasteland in its wake. The valley, which was once filled with the sounds of life, was falling into a deep and unnatural silence, interrupted only by the groaning of the shifting earth. The main artery into the town was Route 61, a highway that eventually became a victim of the heat, the fire burning underneath. The road caused the asphalt to bubble and buckle, creating massive fissures that tore the pavement apart. Steam and smoke poured from these cracks, blinding drivers and warping the road surface. The state of Pennsylvania spent endless resources trying to repair the damage, but the earth refused to be tamed. Eventually, the highway was deemed too dangerous and was permanently closed. A detour was constructed, and the old section of Route 61 was abandoned to the elements and the artists who would soon claim it. This abandoned stretch of road became known as the Graffiti Highway, For years, it served as a canvas for visitors who trekked to the ghost town to leave their mark. The mile-long strip of cracked and buckled pavement was covered in vibrant colors, names, and messages ranging from the profound to the profane. It was a surreal sight, a kaleidoscopic ribbon of art winding through a dead forest, with smoke rising from the fissures in the center line. It became a pilgrimage site for the curious, and the brave a place where the post-apocalyptic atmosphere was palpable. However, even this landmark was recently covered in dirt to deter trespassers, burying the art just like the town. As the houses disappeared, the landscape of Centralia began to change into something wild and menacing. Nature started to reclaim the streets with trees and brush growing up through the cracks in the sidewalks. But this was not a healthy forest. The heat from the ground killed the roots of many trees, leaving behind bleached white skeletons that stood like sentinels in the smog. The ground in the main burn zone is barren and scarred, baked by the subterranean heat. In the winter, snow does not stick to the ground here. It melts instantly upon contact, revealing the brown and gray earth, while the rest of the state is blanketed in white. The few residents who managed to stay fought legal battles for decades to remain in their homes. They argued that the fire posed no immediate threat to their specific properties, and that the government was exaggerating the danger to seize the mineral rights. They lived in a shrinking village, watching their neighbors disappear, until only a handful of houses remained. These holdouts became living ghosts in their own town, maintaining their daily routines amidst a vanishing world. They gathered for Mass at the remaining church, keeping the spirit of the community alive, even as the physical structures were dismantled around them. One of the few buildings that escaped the destruction is the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Perched on a hill overlooking the town, it sits just outside the path of the fire. The blue domes of the church rise above the tree line, a stark contrast to the desolation below. It is said that the church is protected by a divine hand, keeping the flames at bay. On holy days, the bells still ring out, echoing across the empty streets and the smoke-filled valley. It stands as a lonely witness to the history of Centralia, a beacon of faith in a landscape consumed by fire. As night falls over Centralia, the atmosphere shifts from melancholy to terrified. The darkness is absolute, with no streetlights to guide the way. The only illumination comes from the moon and the faint red glow that can sometimes be seen emanating from the cracks in the earth. This is when the legends of the supernatural take hold. Visitors have reported seeing phantom figures walking along the empty sidewalks, fading into the smoke when approached. Some claim to hear the voices of children playing in the empty lots, or the distant sound of a pickaxe striking coal deep underground. The town may be empty of the living, but it is crowded with the memories of the dead. One persistent story involves the ghost of a miner who wanders the hills near the old cemetery. Witnesses describe a figure covered in coal dust, wearing an old-fashioned helmet with a flickering lamp. He is said to appear near the vents, where the smoke is thickest, staring silently into the abyss before vanishing. Locals believe he is one of the many souls lost in the mining accidents of the past, now eternally bound to the burning earth. He is a reminder of the price paid for the black diamond that built and then destroyed this community. His presence is a sorrowful warning to those who dare to trespass on this cursed ground. The cemeteries of Centralia are perhaps the most unsettling places in the entire area. St. Ignatius Cemetery and the other burial grounds are filled with the ancestors of the families who were forced to leave. The fire has reportedly moved close to the borders of these graveyards, raising the gruesome possibility of the heat disturbing the dead. The thought of the fire reaching the coffins adds a layer of macabre horror to the tragedy. Visitors walking among the tombstones often report a feeling of intense heaviness and the sensation of being watched from the tree line. The smoke drifts through the headstones, creating a scene straight out of a Gothic nightmare. There is a palpable sense of unease that settles in your chest when you stand in the center of what was once the town square. The grid of the streets is still visible, but the silence is wrong. It is not the peaceful silence of nature, but the held breath of a predator. The wind blowing through the dead trees sounds like whispering voices. You can feel the heat radiating through the soles of your shoes, a constant reminder of the inferno raging just a few feet below. It is easy to understand why this place served as the inspiration for the horror film Silent Hill. The barrier between the real world and the nightmare seems incredibly thin here. Many thrill seekers and dark tourists travel to Centralia hoping to experience something paranormal. They come with cameras and ghost hunting equipment, eager to capture evidence of the afterlife. But often they find that the true horror is not a ghost, but the overwhelming reality of the devastation. The smoke burns the throat and eyes, and the smell of sulfur clings to clothes for days. The psychological impact of seeing a town erased is profound. It forces you to confront the fragility of human civilization and the awesome, destructive power of nature, unleashed by human hand. The fear here is primal and deeply rooted in the physical environment. One chilling account comes from a group of teenagers who visited the town late one October night. They parked their car near the Odd Fellows Cemetery and walked down the remains of Park Street. As they ventured deeper into the smoke, they became separated in the thick haze. One girl found herself standing alone near a vent that was spewing thick gray clouds. She claimed that the smoke began to take shape, forming twisting, agonizing faces that screamed without sound. She felt an overwhelming urge to step closer to the heat. as if the fire was calling to her, seducing her to join it in the darkness. She was snapped out of her trance by her friends grabbing her arm and pulling her back. They ran back to the car, terrified and breathless, claiming they heard heavy footsteps chasing them on the gravel. When they reached the safety of the vehicle, they saw handprints in the dust on the windows that were not their own. The prints were small, like those of a child, but with elongated fingers. They drove away, speeding down the dark, winding roads, vowing never to return. The experience left them with a lingering dread, a feeling that something from the town had attached itself to them. The fire beneath Centralia is a complex beast, fueled by millions of tons of anthracite coal. Experts estimate that there is enough fuel underground to keep the fire burning for another 250 years. It is a slow-motion disaster that will outlive everyone currently walking the earth. The fire moves and changes, shifting with the wind and the air pressure. It opens new vents and closes old ones, constantly reshaping the landscape. It is a living geological entity, a parasite that is slowly eating its host from the inside out. The futility of fighting it is what drove the government to simply give up. There is a time capsule buried in Centralia, interred by the residents in 1966 during the town's centennial celebration. It was meant to be opened in the year 2016. However, when the date arrived, the capsule had to be retrieved early because the water and gases in the ground had damaged the vault. When it was opened, it was found filled with murky water and mud, destroying many of the artifacts inside. It was a poetic and tragic symbol of the town itself. The memories and history they tried to preserve were corrupted and ruined by the very earth they cherished. In the present day, nature is aggressively taking back the land. The streets that are not used are disappearing under layers of moss and grass. Deer and bears roam where children once rode bicycles. The town is returning to the wild, but it is a scarred and mutated wildness. The trees that manage to survive are often twisted and gnarled, shaped by the toxic soil. The contrast between the lush green of the surrounding Pennsylvania hills and the gray dead zone of Centralia is stark. It looks like a wound on the surface of the planet that refuses to heal. The concept of a gateway to hell is often used in fiction, but in Centralia, it feels uncomfortably close to reality. The fire burns with a distinct blue flame caused by the combustion of methane and carbon monoxide. At night, if you can find a vent that is glowing, the blue light looks otherworldly. It is easy to imagine that the tunnels lead not just to coal seams, but to something far more sinister. The heat, the smell, and the desolate atmosphere combine to create a sensory experience that triggers a deep, instinctive fear. It is a place where human life is no longer welcome. For the few remaining residents, the fire is just a fact of life. They have learned to live with the danger and the notoriety. They are protective of their home and wary of outsiders who come to gawk at their tragedy. They see the town not as a horror show, but as a place full of memories of happier times. However, even they cannot deny the sadness that permeates the air. They are the captains of a sinking ship, refusing to leave the bridge, even as the water rises. Their stubbornness is both admirable and heartbreaking, a testament to the human connection to home. The story of Centralia serves as a grim reminder of the consequences of environmental neglect. It is a monument to a mistake that could not be undone. The fire was caused by a simple act of burning trash, but it unleashed a force that destroyed a community. It challenges our belief in control, showing us that the earth is powerful and unpredictable. The ghosts of Centralia are not just the spirits of the dead, but the echoes of the mistakes we make. They wander the smoke-filled streets, asking why their world was allowed to burn. As you leave Centralia, driving away from the smoke and the ruined streets, the feeling of unease does not immediately fade. You check your rearview mirror, half expecting to see the fog following you down the highway. The smell of sulfur lingers in your car, a souvenir of the visit. You realize that the town is not truly empty. It is occupied by the fire and the memories of what was lost. It is a place suspended in time, burning slowly into eternity. The dread you feel is the realization that some fires can never be put out. The legend says that if you stay too long in the smoke, you will hear the town calling your name. It whispers from the cracks in the pavement and the rustling of the dead leaves. It invites you to stay, to become part of the history, to join the phantom miners in the deep, dark tunnels. Centralia is a scar on the American landscape, a place where the American dream turned into a nightmare. It waits there in the hills of Pennsylvania, burning silently, a ghost story written in ash and fire. And it will continue to burn long after we are all gone. So if you ever find yourself driving through Columbia County and you see a sign for a town that is no longer on the map, keep driving. Do not stop to look at the smoke or explore the graffiti-covered road. Do not listen to the silence or peer into the vents. The ground is treacherous and the air is poison. But more than that, there is a heaviness there that presses on the soul. The fire in Centralia is not just consuming coal, it is consuming the peace of anyone who dares to get too close. Let the ghosts have their town, and let the fire burn alone